Welcome back to the Daily Dope Show. I'm Brando, the weed man over here. And that's my dog if you can hear her. Make sure the fucking mic's on. Yes. So, back to that takeover of medical marijuana in Michigan. I think we're seeing the final phases of the takeover play out right now. And this part of it really reminds me of Arkansas. You remember I did a clip earlier this year about Arkansas and how they were going to do this top down, rules writing and rollout from the legislator, and they agreed on the fees to be $100,000 for a grower license. I'll just really quick go over this. The Arkansas. This is way back in January of 2016. Um, when this story broke. What? No. No, this was 2017. But besides that, yeah, the Arkansas passed in the 2016 elections medical marijuana. They had two different proposals that made the ballot, but one of them somehow got scrutinized a little more and got knocked out. And that one was the one that allowed home growing, I think. But there was still things about that, like you had to live a certain distance from a dispensary if you wanted to grow your own. And I don't think there was anything about people growing weed for other people, like in the caregiver sense. So anyway, the Arkansas Medical Marijuana Commission decided on an annual $100,000 licensing fee for medical marijuana producers Tuesday evening. That fee is in addition to a $15,000 application fee just to apply for the license. They will also have to show that they have at least $1 million in financial assets or a surety bond and have $500,000 in cash available. In their decision tonight, they made it impossible for anything but a huge corporate organization to be able to enter the market, but that was partially their intent. They did not want a company failing in the first few years due to lack of resources, they explained in the meeting. So what am I for? If you're going to ask me, because you could go against me and say, oh well, these places are going to grow lots of weed. Like in Michigan, they're going to grow like 1,000 plants, 1,500 plants, or something like that. I forget the exact numbers. We'll get there in a minute. But anyway, they're talking about giant grow operations and very few of them. And what I like better is having a lot of smaller grow operations. And obviously, my way of thinking is not the corporate structure of our capitalist, greedy ass government is not down with like everybody that knows how to do something being able to make money and profit off of it. For some reason, they feel like they're not going to make as much money, and they're not. When you got these big players and these big corporate people, they're just, they're donating money to the politicians. They have lobbies that lobby the politicians, or they used to be the politicians. And in Michigan, we have a pretty fucking crazy revolving door, so let's get into that. Medical marijuana applicants will have to show the green before they get a license. So, yeah, this is published yesterday after the meeting that they had for the medical marijuana licensing board. East Lansing, people who want to get their medical marijuana business in Michigan could face some serious sticker shock when they submit applications for a license. In addition to the licensing and regulatory fees they'll face from local governments and the state, which will range from $5,000 to $57,000, they may also have to prove that they have liquid assets ranging from $150,000 to $500,000 that will support that business. The capitalization requirements are designed to make sure that the business is successful, said Andrew Brispo, director of the state's Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation. Does that sound familiar? Isn't that what they just said over in Arkansas? They don't want a company failing in the first few years due to lack of resources. Believe me, dude. And I think Arkansas, their medical marijuana plan might even have been a no smoking situation. So they probably won't be very profitable if they go down that road. But in Michigan, smokable bud has always been, and for 8 years of the of the law was the only thing you could call medical marijuana, smokable bud. So I don't think that's going away. So I don't understand what he's saying, man. There's no way that any of these marijuana businesses would fail. You can tell just by looking around that it's almost impossible for a marijuana business to fail. There's too much demand. And as long as you're not ripping people off or your product sucks, people are going to come back for more. There are significant costs in setting up a business. Now that's true too. Someone might be like, well, yeah, so you have to have 300,000 for a dispensary, but that's because you're going to have a lot of inventory on hand. I don't know if 300,000 is justifiable for a dispensary, to be honest. I don't see how you get there. But if you do get there, it's because they had to buy safe, like walk-in safes and have their temperature controlled so the relative humidity is always, that's all that stuff ain't that hard to do. And this just depends. I mean, what is the dispensary? They haven't hashed out exactly what a dispensary is going to entail. Now, if you just assume that it's going to be like the dispensaries of the day today, there's still, they're going to really make everything in that regulated. Like you got a clone room, it's got to have certain temperature controls and certain ways you can control pests and mold and shit. I mean, all the way down to like, you're not going to see ever like a jar with buds in it. Everything's always going to be prepackaged coming from the processor. And by the way, the processing facility, 300,000. What all are they going to be processing there? So anyway, like I was saying, is if you stumbled on my video and you're like, but Brandon, it's going to cost a lot of money to set up one of these businesses. You better be able to prove that you're that kind of a big money guy. Like you got to be able to have, $500,000 in assets if you're planning on growing 1,500 plants. Because why not? One of those harvests, a couple of those harvests are going to pay off this $500,000 situation or whatever. 1,500 plants is a lot. But it's also a lot of overhead. So overall, you're talking about these giant facilities. I don't think 500 plant facility is super giant necessarily. But it is pretty big. It's very large. It's bigger than, most people can handle running it with them and whoever lives with them that actually, if you guys both know what you're doing or you got 3 people in a house, 500 is a lot of plants to manage. But anyway, you could say, well, you got to have all this money to set these places up, so you should be well off. You should be able to show 500,000 in assets or whatever. And you know what? I really don't have anything to come back on that argument, except to say that there is ways that we could do this to keep smaller people around. People that have been doing this from day one, caregivers, for example. Because basically all you have to do is give them an avenue to get their overage to somewhere like a processing facility or whatever, or testing lab, of course. Why don't you let the caregivers get in on that at least? Like be able to do something besides be sitting ducks with a bunch of extra weed. You're forcing people to not grow as much as they can, and now their patients are gonna like suffer or have to pay. Now a lot of these people that are patients to caregivers don't have money to go dispensary shopping around or whatever. So anyway, whatever, the capital requirements and the size of the minimum, this is up to 500 plants. So maybe you did want to just get a facility where you only grew 100 plants. And that's up to 500. That's what that license can be. Why should you have to show $150,000 in liquidity there? I mean, maybe the facility will cost maybe $20,000 to set up something to grow 100 plants. Maybe you could invest more than that. I'm just saying that's like a minimum. But if you threw $50,000 into it, you could probably set up a pretty nice facility to grow 100 plants. I mean, you could even have it so that 100 plants means that you're on a constant rotation system where there's always 25 plants being harvested every week. Um, I don't know, man. Not every week, but whatever. I'm just saying that this fee system is to totally designed to make it so that anybody that's been growing up until now probably can't afford any of this shit. And I'm not a hater. I never planned on getting involved in this medical marijuana facilities licensing game. I just don't see me doing any of the things that they talked about in there, and don't really care to be a big profiteer off of the marijuana industry or whatever you want to call it. And this is medical marijuana, guys. Keep that in mind at all times. This was medical marijuana in Arkansas, and this is medical marijuana in Michigan. So he says there's significant costs in setting up a business, of course. He said that during a meeting of the Medical Marijuana Board. We wanted to ensure that businesses can thrive, but also ensure that they can stay in business and be successful. It's totally the same thing they said in Arkansas. Some board members and many in the audience at the meeting said they feel capitalization requirements are meant to shut out small and minority business owners from the lucrative medical marijuana business. And that's true. If you could just realize that if someone shows that they have experience somehow, a grower is a grower, but all these other ones you don't even really need experience. But 200,000 for secure transporter. I mean, you could buy $200,000 worth of trucks and be like, hey, I could be a secure transporter. What's the problem? Oh, you don't have $200,000 in assets. Well, you know, I guess you do. The trucks, they're not going to be worth $200,000 when you buy them, though. It seems we're placing barriers to the marketplace, said board member David Lamontagne. These numbers will bar minority business owners and mom and pop operations. These kinds of discussions lead to significant outside forces coming in and monopolizing this marketplace, and I think that's a mistake. I think everything you said I agree with there. Under the recommendations from Laura, applicants would have to show the following proof of assets when they apply for a license. So, I mean, I guess you could have everything that you need to set up a dispensary and go spend $300,000 to make everything top of the line and then be like, here's my proof of assets. I mean, they can't, what are they going to do? You know, I guess they can't say nothing about that. And same thing with these growing facilities. Wow, $150,000 is a nice chunk of change to set up a 500 plant grow operation. So you could get a pretty nice setup going. But when you start moving into these bigger numbers here, I mean, the 1,500 plants, just the lights alone are going to cost 500. I mean, you got to set up, you know, and you're talking about, remember before, there's going to be this whole thing where you can stack licenses. As we've talked about before in previous videos, just not too long ago, the board decided, or I think it was Laura that decided, you know what? We didn't say anything about you couldn't stack these licenses, so you could get like 3 of these over here or 4, get 4 of these 1,500 plant licenses, and you're growing 6,000 plants. Does that mean you have to show, you know, $2 million in assets? Your grow operation is probably going to run you about $2 million, by the way. And I mean, you're going to have a lot of land. You're going to have buildings that have temperature controls and heat, you know, lighting. That's going to cost a lot of money to have, maintain, and also like the, you know, juice. How you got to power them babies up. It's a lot of money, man. I would highly recommend throwing some of that into like solar panels and wind turbines and shit if you're trying to grow 6,000 plants. Of course, outdoor growing isn't even mentioned in any of this yet, but I'm sure they'll get to it. 300 for a processing facility, 200,000 for a secure transporter, 200,000 for a testing facility. So go buy $200,000 worth of lab equipment and a place to put it all. and show them your receipts and put in for the license. I guess it's that simple. Am I wrong here? That's a pretty nice lab, though, too, by the way. You're going to have a lot of bonuses and perks with a lab like that. In addition, a municipality can charge up to $5,000 to get approved to operate in the city. So you're going to have to pay all this stuff, have all that money, pay the state fee, and your municipality is going to hit you with something stupid. And it says in the law that this is to help enforcement and like all this other shit that has nothing to do with it. I mean, you got banks around and pharmacies. What are they enforcing there? I don't understand. You know, you look at this, you can compare it to like liquor stores and pharmacies. Somewhere in the middle there. That's how they're treating it, so that's how we can treat it too. You don't have to do any of this shit for a liquor store or a pharmacy. I think that you do. I think it's $50,000 for a liquor store. You have to show assets of. But whoop-de-doo, if your liquor store ain't worth $50,000 in your inventory, what are you even doing? What are you even trying to do? The application fee for the state is going to run between $4,000 and $8,000 depending on the license, and the state regulatory assessment will cost between $10,000 and $57,000. This is only designed for really rich people. When I made the clip about Arkansas, it was titled "Arkansas Prices Rich People Out of the Marijuana Game," or Medical Marijuana Growers Game, or whatever. The license applicants would also have to prove that they were able to get insurance policies that provide at least $100,000 of coverage. What insurers are going to insure a marijuana business? Aren't they still federal? Don't they still have to answer to Uncle Sam? And if they're insuring a marijuana grow operation and something happens and they had to pay out, well, that gets audited and they could get in big trouble. So I don't know about that part. Is this just like a Kill Bill kind of thing here? There's a lot of shit around this that looks to me like if the goal isn't to like totally hand this over to a handful of corporate cronies and government, you know, revolving door, crooked people that used to be either lobbyist politicians or people that want to get in on this, you know, quite frankly, law enforcement. A lot of law enforcement are getting in on this. Former judges, prosecutors, you know, cops, just the people that used to arrest us for this shit and still quite frankly are also trying to get into this game, and they're the ones that are going to be getting these licenses. Remember Responsible Michigan, the Republicans that tried to put together a medical marijuana thing? Or maybe it was even, yeah, it was recreational too, I think. If I'm not mistaken. Either way, they wanted to have 10 fucking companies run the whole thing. Yeah, that was recreational. They were going to have 10 people run 10 companies. It was going to run the whole thing, top to bottom, the whole state. These are those guys. These people doing all this shit in the background and writing all these rules and cutting everybody out of the game. That's them. They're like, oh, we still got medical marijuana. And all they got to do is one day wake up and decide, you know what? We're going to turn medical marijuana into recreational marijuana by just simply crossing out medical, and then marijuana will be the word, and there you go. So, I mean, all this has been said, too. I've been reading a lot of posts from people that went to this meeting. I listened to a lot of the meeting as much as I could really handle. And there was one good takeaway from the meeting, which I'll talk about in a minute. Concerning Don Bailey, a board member and retired officer with the Michigan State Police, he said there's plenty of money in the medical marijuana business to justify the steep financial requirements from the state. So now you're saying that you know people are going to get rich off this shit, so they might as well like be able to prove that they're already rich. That's kind of what you just said. There is a jury trial going on right now where a dispensary grossed $647,000 in a 10-week period of time. So, he said, so a lot of money is being made in these dispensaries right now. Well, the state knows that, man. I mean, the state keeps calling it the $700 million industry or some shit. They plan on making a lot of money. I think they think it's over $1 billion industry. Christina Montague, an Ann Arbor resident who wants to apply for a license to open a dispensary, said that cost is prohibitive for someone who wants to get into the business. Quote, these requirements are going to cut out small business people, which I thought this law was all about. People in rural communities are, and especially minorities. Like, for example, not everybody lives in metropolitan areas, so these fees are just off the fucking hook for normal, everyday people in the country. Like a farmer looks at this and they're like, wait a minute, I got to show $300,000 just to grow 1,000 plants? Please. Anyway, shit. She says, I would ask you to be more realistic and more fair for the small business people and not let millionaires take over this business. And then we have Chad Morrow of Gaylord wondering why the capitalization requirements for other businesses were either much lower or non-existent. Applicants for licenses through the Liquor Control Commission have to show $50,000 in assets, whereas pharmacies don't even have to show any. Quote, this is really asinine. It's not just the high cost, but we're talking about a medical product here, he said, and there's no capitalization requirements for pharmacies. Right, we are talking about medicine, and they're talking about taxing medicine right off the bat. That's what the state is really interested in, that, and that's Republicans, by the way. So usually the Republicans are pointing across the aisle and saying, "Oh, look at Democrats. They are always trying to invent new taxes and raise taxes on shit you shouldn't." And in Michigan, we don't tax pharmacy. We don't tax medicine. There's no tax on medicine. But somehow they're hedging all their bets that they're going to make millions of dollars off of taxing medicine. Briscoe said the department came up with the figures when looking at asset requirements in other states, including Arizona, which requires $150,000 in assets for dispensary, Connecticut, which requires $2 million each in assets for growing or processing operation, and Nevada, which requires $250,000 in liquid assets for growers, processors, and dispensaries. Wow. Didn't bother looking at Michigan and saying, you know what, it worked pretty good with all these different people doing it. He also said the department is willing to be flexible before the final number is approved. Quote, we looked at other state requirements and known costs of acquiring a license. He said, we looked at the data and we had to put it all out there as a starting point for discussion. We want to have input and understand the concerns of interested parties and the board's perspective on things before a final decision is made. Board Chairman Rick Johnson said after the 3 hours of comments from frustrated audience that there appears to be a lot of work to do on this. I understand what people are saying, and I'm open to looking at what works best and make sure that patients get their product. The licensing board could take up the issue of asset requirements for a license when it meets again in November. Applicants for medical marijuana licenses will be available from the state on December 15th. And the licensing board is expected to begin awarding licenses in the first quarter of 2018. So this is no end in sight to the stories coming out of that. And part of that is this. Michigan regulators will allow mega growers of medical marijuana. And in that vein, like I said, you can stack those growers' licenses, and you could even have growers, processors, and sellers on the same property. And then this quote comes from Robin Schneider, legislative liaison for the National Patients' Rights Association, which advocates for safe and legal access to medical marijuana. Said she understands the department's desire to stick to the letter of the law, which said the number of licenses can't be mandated. Quote, but there is the potential that they'll take away opportunities for small business owners. Clearly, that's what they're doing. Here's an example of how they're doing it. 130-acre medical marijuana development to provide 1,000 Michigan jobs. The demand is there. Michigan has about 220,000 medical marijuana card holders. The Harvest Park development in Eaton County will be one of the first facilities to serve them as the state of Michigan begins to open licensing for such projects. Upon completion of the development next year, the 130-acre space just southwest of Lansing will be home to one of the largest medical marijuana developments east of the Mississippi River, Managing Director Jeff Donahue said. Quote, Michigan is the second largest medical marijuana state in the country, second to California. Donahue said, there's going to be a big demand as the new rules and regulations get implemented and this thing gets up and operational, which probably won't be till this time next year when everything's actually coming to the dispensaries. We'll actually be having products. I mean, this is just assuming that they're going to stick to the letter of the law and not have products on the shelf that weren't grown at a medical marijuana license facility and all this other shit. So anyway, why Windsor Township? I'll tell you why. It's right outside of Lansing. If you didn't know that, it's just right across the river from Lansing. So there's that. Just a hop, skip, and jump. And it is really in the middle of the state here. I mean, what more do you need to know? But anyway, they're extremely receptive to the industry, allowing developments like Harvest Park through zoning and ordinance measures. The development will be next to Grand River on South Kreitz Road near Lansing Road. 63 acres of the site are a former wheat field, while 67 acres were the start of an industrial park which was abandoned. The infrastructure build out on the property should begin in the next 45 to 60 days, Donahue said. So no licenses have been handed out, filled out, churned back in, none of that shit. But somehow these guys are already like hundreds of thousands of dollars in, it looks like. They're already about to start building shit. Plans to develop the 63 acres space by late spring, early summer 2018. Develop of the next 67 acres will come later. He expects the development to create 1,000 new jobs. Harvest Park isn't sharing how much it has invested in the project. Harvest Park is preparing the space, dividing it into 10 lots to sell to licensed cultivators, processors, and other medical marijuana fields. So they're just kind of like the industrial park part of it's like, okay, anybody that wants to do this thing here can do it here. And it's just like more overhead. Why would someone do this at a facility that you build and rent to them when they can just do their own? I don't know, man. Really weird. This sounds like it was one of those things pre-built into the idea that they're going to cut, everybody down to just like really basically workers. They don't want anybody to be owners in this at all. Medical marijuana card holders cannot purchase the product at the location, however. The municipality does not allow for retail or provisioning centers. Somebody with a card will still have to go to a dispensary or provisioning center to get their products. So basically, yeah, that's like your typical situation where, like I say in some of these videos about Michigan, that your municipality don't have to have a dispensary or a processing center or whatever in the thing. One of the 5 facilities you don't want, you don't have to have them. And the end result there is that you have people producing marijuana and then shipping it out. No one can buy it at that town. It's kind of like, well, do you accept marijuana or not? You'll make it and sell it to other people, but you won't have it for sale in your own town. It's pretty fucking disingenuous. And it's a way that they can get their cut of the Michigan taxes that are coming back to places that have facilities without actually selling weed. And the good news that came out of that meeting was this situation right here where Bailey got served civil court papers in front of 200 people who cheered it. And this is Stephen Marks. These are some people that went to the meeting. Sorry if I made your post public again, but whatever. I mean, it's the only news I had on this. And apparently the papers are about when Bailey was involved with the Don Koschmider arrest. Apparently he assaulted Mr. Koschmider. So who knows what's going to come of that. But that's all I got on this story. Yeah, like I said at the beginning, my first video was basically saying that when the state legislature passed those Public Act 281, 282, the intention of that was to basically end the old medical marijuana program as we know it, phase it out really quickly and rapidly, and take it over with well-connected, heavily moneyed interests. And the ancillary businesses, you've already seen it. Someone just bought a thing to have an industrial park full of weed places that they rent to you. This is just a money grab like you've never seen before. Who knows if it's going to be successful or not? I'm having my doubts. But one thing is for sure is there's going to be a gap where patients are not going to be able to get medicine. And that sucks. That's all I got on this story. Hit the subscribe button if you want more, man. This Michigan shit ain't, it's not stopping anytime soon. I'm going to have Michigan stories every time one comes up. And between now and this time next year, there's going to be a lot. Trust me. So that's it.